This is all theater. This is all just political theater.
Political theater. Political theater.
Pure political
theater.
Theater.
Political theater.
The
nefarious,
significant and protracted
political
theater for political theater's sake.
I yield back.
From Washington, this is Political Theater, Roll Call's review of the spectacle of politics on Capitol Hill and across the country. I'm Jason Dick. The 2024 presidential campaign has felt kind of incumbenty. Is that a word? I'm not sure it is, but it certainly feels like it should be real to define this race. First, it was Joe Biden and Donald Trump, an incumbent president and a former president facing off. Then Biden dropped out, Kamala Harris became the nominee, and now we have Donald Trump, the former president, and the current vice president running. You have to kind of go back a ways to get anything remotely similar to this. 1968 comes to mind. Lyndon Johnson decided not to run for re-election. His vice president, Hubert Humphrey, decided to run and became the nominee. And he was running against Richard Nixon, who was the former vice president under Dwight Eisenhower, but had been out of office for 8 years at that point. So this doesn't happen that often, and it's created some weird dynamics. And when I think of weird dynamics, I think of John Bennett. John, hey. Welcome back to Political Theater. Hey, let's talk about this weird incumbenty year because it's. I know sometimes when we're talking in the morning about like what stories to cover, it's like, well, Biden's doing this, but then Harris is doing that, and Trump, blah, blah. And it's like, wait, who is even the president? It feels like Trump has been president for 900 years at this point. We're running for it. But let's talk about this week. I mean, we've at the UN General Assembly in New York. So Joe Biden has been up there. We'll talk about his appearance on The View, which you were just, delighted to watch, I'm sure, being a View man yourself. But Harris and Trump are out campaigning in the battlegrounds. Like, what is it? What's it like? Is this even remotely similar to anything that you've been around, maybe since 2020, I guess?
Not really. Not really even close. I mean, you could. At the end of the 2016 race, Secretary Clinton did deploy then President Obama, outgoing President Obama, but that was really in the last half month or month of that campaign. In October, he really got out there. He went to a lot of places with a lot of Black and minority voters. Obviously, didn't go to Wisconsin and Michigan quite enough back then. Yeah, that month is the only thing that I can really think of. But now, I mean, I've started to call them, meaning Biden, Harris, and Mr. Trump, my three presidents. Of course, the knockoff idea there of what is it, My Three Sons, I guess, the old television show.
And old doesn't even mean the half of it. This is a television show that Fred McMurray headlined.
Right. I mean, today's a great example. You just had the sitting president, Biden, on The View. He's now headed. He's in New York. He's been in New York for about a day and a half now with the UN General Assembly. He addressed the assembly yesterday morning and then had a number of other public remarks in New York. He has some more of that after The View today, so you've got to keep an eye on him, especially, we care a ton about policy on the CQ side, so you got to keep an eye on Biden, a lot of presidential powers, and, you got to suspect they're sitting on some things that they might try to do after the election, and he might give you a hint of that, so you got to hang on his every word. Then you've got a Trump rally around 1 o'clock in my old stomping grounds of North Carolina. Then Vice President Harris is delivering another economic speech, this one in Pittsburgh around 3:15, 3:30. And then if that wasn't enough, you've got more Vice President Harris doing an interview with MSNBC, I believe at 7. That'll air at 7 p.m. So this is just an example. I call these talkathons. And they're just talking all day. And here I am talking. So more talking. And it's the hardest part, one of the hardest parts right now is just figuring out when everyone is going to start talking. The Harris campaign is, I've talked to Democrats and some Republicans who say operationally, day to day, it's an upgrade, and so many ways it's an upgrade. One way it's not is we don't get times for what she's doing until 9:30, 10 o'clock the night before, and that can make it hard to structure your next day and plan ahead. If you're a planner like me, that's a hurdle. So it's just you've got to get yourself freed up to capture them all, and it creates situations where, and I've had to do this in the last couple of weeks, you have to choose between a Harris or Trump event and, for instance, a White House briefing, or even something that President Biden's doing, and try to line up colleagues to fill in for you there. So it's just this. It's one big logistical puzzle that we have to do every day. And then there's we have to think about, well, if I write about this Trump rally at 2 p.m., do we need to also pay attention to this Harris thing at 8 p.m. because you want to give the full picture to the reader. So it's just this ongoing moving, just this thing that we've never really seen before, and we've got another 6 weeks to go.
Yeah, 40 plus days, or 40 days, I guess, or something. Time has no meaning anymore.
No,
at this point.
It really it is actually a flat circle now.
Yeah, and I mean also like the each one of these individuals has a record now. I mean, like we're in the mode of figuring out like what Biden's legacy is going to be. Biden is also managing, a couple of wars. I mean, like he's trying to, make sure that Ukraine, gets the support has coming to it from an ally like the United States. He's trying to figure out how to keep the Middle East from continuing to escalate. And, at this point, it seems like it's only escalating, with now the field of battle expanding into Lebanon and Hezbollah. And so there's a lot going on just with the president, right? There's just that is a big deal. And then, Harris is being, particularly lines of attack from her opponent and from Republicans. Harris, is part of the Biden administration. So she has a record, she had a record as a senator, but, more relevant in the context of this race is what she's done as a vice president. She's, talk about a lot of tie-breaking votes to the vice president. There are very few duties that the vice president has. One of them constitutionally is to break a tie, and in a 50-50 or 51-49 Senate, she's had to do that a lot over the last 3.5, almost 4 years. And then Trump also, Trump was the outsider when he ran in 2016. He has a full record that on taxes, on healthcare, on judges, on abortion rights, and so forth, or abortion restrictions more appropriately. And so the record, they all have records, and they're all proposing things. They're all, and so this is all news. I mean, you wrote about Trump's speech yesterday in Georgia about taxes. Now, some of it was a little hard to follow, but one of the things that he did sort of come down on, and he's come down on consistently, is that he will impose tariffs, on companies that he doesn't think are doing America firsty kind of stuff. And this gets economists wondering oh, okay, maybe this is serious. He's mentioned it enough times. So, I mean, this is all kind of novel, if you will.
It really is. Trump, with his usual bravado, gives a speech. Well, I just stepped on my own rule there. We got to stop calling these things speeches. He gave remarks. They've never been speeches, really. Maybe a State of the Union or two back in the day. But he, with his usual bravado, Trump comes out and says, tariffs for all, unless you do my bidding on every demand that I have. And that's kind of vague. And, there's gonna be some nuance. He's going to put Bob Lighthizer in some position who's going to be involved in this. And to the extent that President Trump listened to anyone, it seems like he did trust Lighthizer and thought he was a pretty bright guy and capable negotiator. I don't know if he's Treasury Secretary or what Lighthizer might be nominated for or appointed to. But people like that will bring some nuance and say, well, sir, maybe it's not a good idea to throw tariffs on, that British toaster just because you're upset this morning. So it won't be a blanket tariff. There will be some nuance. There was nuance in his original term, but Vice President Harris, she hasn't put a lot of policy on the bones, as we say. She's had a lot of very vague proposals, and Republicans have criticized her. Democrats, of course, criticized Trump. They say the tariffs would be inflationary, and he hasn't gotten specific on when he might do this and when he might not do it. So that's another dynamic that's really challenging, and I think we'll hear that from the vice president later today, just kind of more vague. She's trying to say vague things that sound good to a large group of people because she's trying to get every vote she can. She's more of a big tent electoral approach. And Trump, and we'll see if this works, continues to just this mercantilistic trade policy that applies to some, but not all Republicans. And he's trying to win this thing yet again with his base. And, we'll see if he can get back to 78 or 80 million votes. But that's the biggest difference I see. But it does make it hard. They're both speaking in very vague terms. Now, all politicians do. You know that better than me. You've covered politicians longer than I have. But it just seems different this time. There's just not a lot of meat there to pull off the bone. And, we just have to do the best we can and talk to experts and lawmakers on the Hill who cover this stuff every day. So that's another challenge is they're not as specific, it feels like, as past campaigns.
Yeah. And I think that, one of the nice things about like working where we work is that we can find out their records, their voting records and things that they signed and so forth, because I would say that that's as in the absence of detail, that's always a good place to start. And we just happen to have all the goods, that we've got the particularly, with Trump, the record is relatively clear as president. As vice president, Harris doesn't have as much of the responsibility for developing the current administration's policy, but she does bear any blame, so she might as well embrace if they have successes and just like studying those records is pretty helpful.
Yeah, and then speaking of incumbents, I mean, you can throw in the two vice presidential nominees. Now, Senator Vance, the Republican VP nominee, he doesn't have as an extensive record as Governor Walz, but Governor Walz used to be Congressman Walz. So, if our listeners want to log on to CQ and dive into to Walz's record, it's there. And Vance's, 2 years in the Senate, it's also there. And there are some interesting votes that both have cast along the way.
Yeah. The policy is there, but I want to get back to the politics. So you mentioned Joe Biden was on The View. Just quick, 30-second to a minute, rundown of how that went. Because again, this has a reach. The View has millions of viewers. It's sort of in the middle of the day. It's reaching an audience that maybe just mutes an ad when they're watching football or something. So this is his chance to shine. How did Joe? What's the rundown of Joe's appearance on The View?
I don't think this was anything out of the recent ordinary for President Biden. He did try out a new explanation for why he opted to step down, which I thought was interesting. I had to rewind the DVR to make sure I heard it the first time correctly. He said he just didn't have time to think about if now was the time to pass the torch to a new generation, to Vice President Harris, because he was busy getting too much done that the critics said he wouldn't be able to get done as president. Now, I do happen to take I think he has a point. That he did do more things. He got more legislation passed than I think you or I expected him to. He got infrastructure done. Trump didn't do that. And I was in the briefing room multiple days during the Trump administration when there were handouts about infrastructure week. So, Biden gets to have a victory lap here in his last few months. But it was uneven at times. Now, there are a lot of hosts on that show, and there was a lot of cross-talking. And at 40, whatever I am, I would have struggled too, maybe to keep up with all they've got going on there. There was slurring. He slurs his words. He doesn't finish his sentences. Sometimes he can't get the thought out, and there was some of that. He again talked of this vision for the Middle East that experts, longtime U.S. policy hands that I've talked to or read their blog posts or whatever online or seen them on television, they just they don't see it headed toward this diplomatic solution, this two-state solution that these ceasefire talks are going to work in Gaza and then spread to Lebanon, and Biden. I think people. I pick up that people were turned off by this always optimistic Biden, and that's what we got again. We got that in part yesterday at the UN, and again on The View. And I'm an old cynical reporter at this point, but even I look at the screen and Mr. President, 500 people died in Lebanon in the last few days that we know of. Nobody over there is thinking this is going to end anytime soon. So, I think it's just I think it was a typical uneven. And I know Biden wants, he wanted his presidency to be optimistic and upbeat, but that optimistic outlook it makes him seem out of touch a lot of the time. And I thought at the end of the interview when they talked about the Middle East, that came out again.
So I think this begs a question. I mean, we talked a little bit about how, President Obama was on the trail for Hillary Clinton in the last months in 2024. So was, her husband, who again famously said, maybe we should pay a little more attention to Michigan and so forth. I would expect more of that. I would expect the Obamas to be on the trail, maybe Oprah, there's some of the people that we saw at the DNC will probably be as involved. The Harris people like to sort of portray this as a big, sort of movement. I mean, Trump will always, get a charge out of his rallies, and he'll have some folks, not as many stand-ins, certainly not as many, like there are no incumbent for former presidents who are going to be campaigning for him. George W. Bush has kind of kept quiet, but he's not going to be out on the trail. And then Dick Cheney and Mike Pence have said that they are not going to vote for him. So for Biden, it's this weird thing. I mean, he doesn't fire people up like Obama does. He doesn't have the folksiness or the connection to people that Bill Clinton does. But so does he help or hurt, or does he, is he out on the trail, or does he just kind of, try to wrap things up, as best he can? I can't see like the great clamor in the Harris campaign to have Biden out on the trail for her.
There's no clamor. He was out, a week and a half, 2 weeks ago doing some events. And I think it's how they use Biden, and it won't be a lot, but it'll be, very targeted and tactical. Think about Pennsylvania. She can't lose Pennsylvania. I've read and looked at this myself, and, that's the key for her. That's probably why she picked Pittsburgh to do today's economic speech. She's been there a ton. He went there a ton when he was trying the same electoral trick she is. So, I think, Pennsylvania, parts of the Rust Belt, unions, keeping union members engaged and fired up to go vote, and making the case for her maybe to some more conservative Democrats who are union members. That's where I think you'll see Joe Biden. You're not going to see Joe Biden maybe an HBCU or two, something like that, but you're not going to see some huge rally where I don't think they're co-headlining it in, for instance, Charlotte in North Carolina. I think that'll just be her. Maybe Governor Walz joins her. So I think we're going to see some international travel in October for the president. So he certainly won't be on the trail then. And one thing we learned about the international travel to Normandy, France, and then to the G7 in Italy, that took a lot out of the 81-year-old president. So when he comes back from this international trip that I think we're going to hear more about soon, he may, who knows, he goes to Rehoboth or Wilmington and rests for a few days, and he won't be campaigning then either. So I think we will see him out there. I think it'll be very targeted. I mean, you could see him, the bromance with former President Obama, maybe they do a rally or two together. But, unions and Pennsylvania, I think that's where he's strongest.
Yeah. Park him in Scranton. You can.
Why not?
Scranton,
why
John.
not?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, John, thanks so much. I know you got to prep for your next event you're covering.
One of the
three presidents.
One of them is speaking. I'll figure it out when I log on to C-SPAN which one it is.
Yes, and again, for those of you who have not seen, and most people alive, I don't think, have seen an episode of My Three Sons. It is a curio of pop culture. It does have a very catchy intro song we'll leave for you to watch on YouTube or something like that. But anyway, thanks, John. Appreciate your insight, and let's get back on the trail.
Thanks for having me, Jason.